Hi everyone, and welcome to our new Cloud Academy webinar. Today we have a special session and we are going to talk about AWS Reserved Instance Fundamentals. I'm very happy to have Patrick Garland, CTO at CloudCheckr, with us. We'll discuss about how AWS Reserved Instances are structured and sold, and how your organization can efficiently leverage them to save money and ensure coverage for critical workloads in the cloud. It will be an interesting conversation, and I hope you learned something useful today. How's it going today, Patrick?
Hey, thank you very much. Let me go ahead and share my presentation.
Why don't you give us a quick background and tell everybody who you are and what you do?
Thank you. So we work for CloudCheckr, CTO there, and what we do is help people manage their deployments on AWS and Azure. We look at cost, security, inventory, automation, provide you tools to look across all of your accounts at once. So if you have multiple AWS accounts, we can aggregate all of that data together. And it typically becomes a must-have for multiple organizations across your company, all the way from DevOps to finance, depending on the various reports or automation pieces they want to take advantage of. What we'll go over today is kind of the reserved instance functionality that we have and how that can apply to your organization.
Great. So I'll pass it to you.
We are going to talk about reserved instances. So usually what you want to first talk about is, what is your reserved instance strategy? Have you talked to accounting and finance yet? Are they going to amortize costs? Are you doing chargebacks? How are you dividing the costs up within your company? Are different teams using the same accounts that you need to divide the costs up there? Tagging strategy. How are you going to tag it? This is very crucial for getting very granular cost reporting and having those reports go back, especially when it starts to impact budgets or spill over budgets, or you have a few people using more than they should be using. So who is going to own the ongoing process? How are you going to maintain your RI spend, or your RI coverage ratio for your usage? You're going to want someone to own this because it's not a one-time thing and you're done. You have to keep going as your footprint expands on AWS or in the cloud in general. So typical AWS growth, and this is usually what leads up to people wanting to buy RIs. You'll have very minimal in the beginning. The dev team will be testing it, seeing what they can do, run a load test, put a POC on there, get approval to put an app on there, maybe another app, maybe a third app, and before you know it, it's kind of an avalanche of all these services migrating to the cloud, or the services that you have up there growing. So then you start getting this inflection point where the executives actually start caring about your spend, because there's usually enough commas in the bill that it starts raising eyebrows, and this will be one of the precursors to, hey, we need RIs, we need to clamp down on our AWS spend, because right now it is more than we had budgeted for, and we can't control it or track it properly. So let's go into reserved instances. There's two main types, standard and convertible. The pros for standard, they're 1 and 3 year. There's different payment options, whether you pay some up front, some partial of it up front, or all of it up front. That determines what your discount's going to be. They also allow they give you the maximum discount possible. So the cons for these are limited flexibility, and this is why they get a higher discount. They're going to make sure they're going to be in a position in a way that you need to know what your usage is going to be for the next year to 3 years. You're going to be confident that you're going to be able to utilize it, because an unutilized RI is basically just wasted money. Now, AWS realized that a lot of teams had trouble predicting out a year, or especially 3 years. So they recently launched late last year convertible RIs. Pros of these is that they're modifiable. You can change the OS, the instance family, kind of whatever you're looking to do or whatever your workloads are changing to. You get much larger discounts than 1 year RIs. And like I said, you can convert these to just about anything you want, which you can't do with 1 year or 3 year standard RIs. Cons are that it is a 3 year term, so you do have to make sure that you are committed to using AWS for the next couple of years. There's limited, they actually just released the no upfront recently, but in the beginning it was limited to partial and full upfront options, and you don't quite get as much of a discount versus the standard 3-year RIs because they do give you the flexibility. So with flexibility comes a little bit less of savings. So reservation types, we're looking at an M4 large. What we just talked about, standard 1 year and 3 year versus convertible. You can see the savings over on demand, how much is required for upfront, partial upfront, and then kind of what your monthly spend is going to be on that RI if you don't pay for it all upfront. So this is where you usually will weigh the trade-offs. Do you really need to save more? Do you have kind of a standardized workload, or is your workloads high enough that you can get 1 year and 3 year to capture that extra savings? You can see convertible 3 years the all up front is about 48%, whereas the 3-year one is 63%. So there are significant additional savings to getting the standard 3-year. Again, you just have to be very cognizant that your workloads will need to use that for the next 3 years, which is typically difficult for most organizations to predict out that far, depending on your workloads. Now, one thing that helps you identify or utilize these RIs is they announced regional RIs late last year, late 2016. And this means that you don't have to lock down an RI to only be used within an availability zone. Previously, you'd have to buy, say you wanted to buy 30 RIs, you'd have to buy 6 in each different availability zone if that's how your workloads are spread out. An RI in US East 1A could not be used, or you would not get a discount for usage in 1B. Same with C, D, and E. This made it a little bit difficult, especially as workloads would move or different accounts would have access to different availability zones. So they came out with regional RIs. This allows you to buy the RI just to cover US East 1, and it'll apply automatically to any workloads that are happening in any of the availability zones. This makes it a lot easier to manage. The one downside is that you don't get a capacity reservation guarantee, which previously, if you had it to a specific AZ, you were guaranteed to be able to launch an instance in that AZ, even if they do get capacity constrained. Typically, though, that is not as much a concern anymore, and most people would trade off the savings and the simplicity of managing the RIs, because it is significant, and put a load balancer that just works across multiple availability zones. So, okay, you know how they are, you know what the savings are, you've kind of identified this is the path we want to go. Now you need to start visualizing your usage so that you can buy RIs for your demand. So we offer a tool to help make suggestions based on the frequency of your usage. You can see down below, I think that's about a year's of usage for a particular instance type. This is going to be like an M4 large Windows in US East. You can see the last 30 days. You can see the coverage. Hey, we have 50 RIs. The tool is suggesting you go up to about 77 here so that you can optimize your savings with the RIs you have. You look at the chart below, you can see, okay, it's pretty healthy growth chart there. It's not kind of a one-time blip that is going to fall down. You can go ahead and make the purchase and start capturing those savings. This is how you do it at scale when you're dealing with buying 20, 30 RIs at a time. If you're looking at it on a much smaller scale, we can break it down by instance. Hey, here are the instances that we're suggesting you buy RIs for, and you can go follow up with those teams to see, hey, is this what we are looking for? Or is your workload going to stay the same? Do we want to get some RIs? Are you going to be turning these off soon? What does it look like? One thing that is typically good is, we'll talk about it in just a moment, but RI coverage. So you typically have about 70% of your spend covered at an RI rate or at a discounted rate. This gives you a little bit of flexibility if teams turn workloads off or change the instance type they're using so that you don't have unused RIs. Now, if your company is growing on AWS and growing month over month, that's even less of a concern that you'd have unused RIs, because typically the growth will outweigh anyone that changes or moves a specific workload. Now, so you know how much you want to get, you know what types you want to get. There's a few other factors that you want to take in consideration before you actually pull the trigger on it. Right-sizing your workloads. This is probably the #1 thing you can do to save money if that's what you're looking to accomplish on AWS right now. Right-sizing your workloads, you cut the server size down from an M4 2XL to an M4 XL. That cuts your price in half. That's much more than you'll get with any RIs, and it doesn't cost you a thing besides turning the instance off, changing the size. We actually offer a right-sizing report based on your CPU history. We can also take in memory metrics if you're putting those into CloudWatch, and we can suggest, hey, this should be, instead of an M4 large, maybe it should be a T2 medium, because your CPU never really goes above a certain percentage. And we actually have a Fix It Now button. You can just go in, click it, we'll turn it off, change the instance size, and restart the instance for you. So it makes it as seamless and effortless as possible to maximize your savings there. Spot instances. We recently partnered with SpotInst, which helps identify workloads that you can move to Spot instances, which can save, they say up to about 90% off, which is actually pretty accurate. We're not going to go into spot instances too much in this conversation, but if you have workloads that are stateless and can work behind load balancers and deal with instances being turned on and off, not super frequently, but sometimes, this is a great option to save additional money as well. Okay, so you've right-sized, you've used Spot where it's possible, and now you're ready to buy RIs. You want to make sure that you have the cost reporting available and granular enough so that you can give it to the different, or you can apply usage and spend to different teams. Accounting knows where to apply it to. The cost centers are getting recorded correctly, so that the teams that are buying RIs or the teams that are using the RIs get the appropriate discounts reflected in their bill. Worst case is when you buy RIs, people say, well, why didn't my bill go down? And usually it's because their growth was, they grew that month, and so their bill just went up less than it otherwise would have. But you want to be able to have the reporting to show them that, because that is one thing you don't want to have derail the RI buying or the RI buying process, is people not seeing it reflected in their bill accurately. You also want to consolidate accounts. This allows teams to share unused portions of their RIs across other teams. You can also look at all of your accounts at once, consolidated, and buy them across all of the accounts, which makes it a lot easier of a process. You're able to buy a lot more at scale. It just is a very good way to do it, and you get economies of scale with RIs. If you get a certain number, you get a bulk discount. You can help trigger other bulk discounts that aren't part of RIs, but having a consolidated account across your organization definitely is one of the #1 things to start saving money and to get everything organized. And one thing on convertible RIs, I just want to make sure I mention, you do have to convert it to something equal or greater. So you can't necessarily get a refund back from AWS, but typically if you're switching to something, say 10 M4 largest to something else, you can do it so that the cost to you is actually relatively small. The other thing that people do with this is they do allow you to exchange an RI for the exact same one if their pricing drops. So AWS will announce price drops, M4 drops by 12%. You can go in and convert your existing M4s to M4s again and capture that savings. You might have to pay a little depending how the metrics work out, but you can probably add 1 or 2 more RIs for essentially free depending how many you're going to convert. Now, this is brand new, released yesterday. Linux RI, so I'm sorry we don't have a good graphic for this, but Linux RIs will now count towards any usage within the instance family. So if you look on the right-hand side, we have the normalization factor, and basically it's saying that if you have a M4 large, it counts as like 4, is the easiest way to describe it. So if you have 2 mediums running, that large will actually cover both those mediums and give you a discount on 2 of the mediums. So you no longer have to worry about whether you need to buy large or medium or extra large for Linux types. You just basically look at kind of total credits here, or total size, and total it up and buy enough RIs to equal that. It makes it much, much simpler. It also maximizes your savings because it'll automatically apply the RIs as much as possible across all of your Linux instances. Now, it only works within families, so an M4 XL is not going to apply towards a C4 XL, but generally, if you standardize on families, this can be very powerful across your organization. And like I said, this was just released yesterday. AWS has it on their blog. You can go take a look. Okay, RI management. So we've identified the type, you have the reporting. Now it's how do you do this month over month? You ultimately, depending on the size of your organization, you want to have one or two people responsible, and you do this simply so that you don't have some people buying RIs and then other people buying additional ones, not realizing that person A had already bought some. It also depends if you do it by team or at an organizational level. But you typically go through our reports, identify what you want to buy, send it to management, to your management, to get approval, saying, I want to spend this much money to cover these instances, and this is the estimated savings that we will see. And this is why we want to buy for these instances. We've talked to the teams. They're comfortable that they're going to have it up for another year, or we're buying enough to only cover 50 or 60% of our total spend and our total usage, and we don't expect a lot of stuff to be turned off or modified anytime soon. Keep it simple, especially if you're just getting started. Go for regional RIs, go for 1 year or convertible. Don't try and buy 3-year RIs on day one. Unless you know exactly what you're doing and exactly what the workloads are going to be, start simple, get your feet wet, get some RIs going, have finance management see the savings that you are getting, and then go on to more stricter RIs or larger purchases. Usually it's kind of a leap of faith to get people to believe in RIs, that they're spending money to save money and that it is actually a real percentage savings that they'll get. So usually getting the proof, showing them, hey, this is how it works, this is the actual money I saved last month, goes a long way to getting the whole organization on board and helping you identify more RIs to purchase and giving you the funds to go and do it. Group up usage in a region. Now this does not override any high availability requirements you have, but typically what you'd want to do is say, hey, we're going to launch everything in US West 2 or the new Ohio region. If especially dev or test type instances, let's group it up in a specific region so that you do get the economies of scale and you get multiple people sharing RIs across the company. You might have to do this regionally, one here, one in Frankfurt, depending if your EU team needs their instances launched there for lag or any other reasons. But that's one of the biggest things you can do, is to keep everything grouped up in one place. If you do have high availability stuff set up, that's multi-regional, you should try and standardize those regions as well. Again, the more you can consolidate everything into instance families and OSs, as the next bullet says, and by region, that just gives you much more buying power, much more economies of scale when you're looking through this, or when you're looking to buy RIs. So here is an example chart of buying RIs to get your coverage up, where you kind of start off, you buy incrementally more and more each month. And the yellow line here is your coverage percentage. That black check line at the top is around 70% coverage, and that's typically the goal for most companies. You can go up to 90% depending if you know your workloads, or 100% if you really know your workloads, but 70 to 80% is usually a very safe target for most companies when they want to buy RIs and don't want to risk buying RIs that go unused. So you can see this company started, you can see the dip because some RIs expired, which they do. Next month they bought more. You can see every month they're buying a package of RIs at once. And this is, you want to get a standardized date. That way when some expire, you're buying some the next day, and you don't go 2 or 3 weeks having a large group of expired RIs that just end up costing you more money. So by standardizing the date just makes the process a lot easier. You also don't want to buy them, say, every 2 weeks typically, because you want to be able to look at a month's usage, see what's changed over the last month, unless you know, hey, these workloads started and they're going to be here. We want to buy RIs for that. You also typically would not buy RIs before you start using it. So if you know you're going to launch 30 instances this month, you typically wouldn't buy RIs before you launched. You would wait till after you launch. Make sure that the 30 is actually what's going to be there, what it is you're going to use, because you can't return RIs. So you want to make sure your usage is there. And typically the lack of savings for 1 month outweighs any potential change that might happen, which causes you to be stuck with unused RIs. Now, if we look at a long-term plan, This is taking it, the previous chart, and kind of applying it to typical scenario of a company long term. They'll have a bunch of on-demand, which is on the left-hand side. They'll make, hey, we want to get our coverage up, our bill's way too high. They're going to make one huge purchase, and they're going to see their RI coverage spike. Their spending will go down, but as the company continues to grow month over month, their spending is going to increase and even go higher than they previously were. You can see each month they're buying the RIs, they are getting the coverage higher. This company took a little bit longer to get their target RI coverage of 70%. It really depends how comfortable you are with your workloads and how comfortable you are buying the RIs and getting approval to spend that money. But this is actually a very typical scenario where they make a huge jump in the beginning and slowly work their way up. Usually there's teams that they're waiting to either right-size their instances or change off because a new region or a new instance type launched and they want to change it, but they're waiting a month for their scheduled downtime or something like that. So you'll have some instances that you won't be able to buy for on day one, but you'll probably not want to delay purchasing it for all the other ones you can. So over time, your coverage gets higher and higher. Now, this seems like lots to manage, especially over time and having to do this monthly. Cloud Checker offers a wide range of tools on this. We can clean up untagged resources so that your cost reports are not polluted by charges you can't go assign back to teams. Customized reporting, we do amortization depending how your accounting team wants to recognize the spend in RIs because it is a prepay unless you do the no upfront, but most people typically do the partial upfront, which requires them to decide do they want to take the charge for it now or do they want to amortize it over the life of the RI. Resource management, this is some of the charts I showed you. Analyze your usage, know what's in your inventory. We run the recommendations for you so that you can see, hey, this is what I'm looking for, or this is what's suggested. You don't necessarily have to start with a blank slate and figure it out yourself. We'll give you a very good starting point to work from. RI rebalancing and resizing. If you do go for AZ specific RIs, we offer rebalancing so we can move them around for you. Say, hey, this RI in 1A is not being used. However, if you move it to 1B, you can there's usage there that can take advantage of the lower rate. Moving it is free within AWS, and it's a very simple process. We actually offer a quick fix it now button, so you can do it straight from our interface and recognize those savings. And we can run that RI rebalancing report pretty often. I think we run about 10 to 20 times a day so that you can easily see what needs to be changed. Now, there's not necessarily, if you're going with regional, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. It's really if you want to have that capacity reservation and you really want to look for AZ-specific RIs. You can also map RIs. This becomes very important if you want one instance to take advantage of the RIs and not share it. AWS does share the discount across the usage within your consolidated account. We can unshare that. We can help group it up so that the people who get the RIs or paid for them do get the usage discount reflected in their monthly statements. Now, here's all the tools that we offer. Here's the strategies. Now, this is an actual report from one of our partners, and this is how their spend and their growth went. Or I'm sorry, not their spend, their AWS usage hourly. So the metric we're doing here is just CPU hour, or I'm sorry, instance hours. There's a lot of other ways you can identify it, but this is one to show you the coverage. Their spend started off, or their usage started off relatively low. Middle of 2016, it started growing, and that's when they were like, okay, we need to get RIs. So in the middle, they made a small purchase, spent a month or two figuring out how they're going to do it, making sure that they got the budget approval because this was a large spend, and then kind of hit the gas pedal in July and August. Now, you can see how fast they were growing is that at the end of it in December, their total usage covered by RIs was greater than their combined usage in August. So that's how fast this was growing, and this is why it's so important to stay on top of your RI purchasing and do it each month, because if they had bought everything in August, that would be such a small percentage of their overall usage come December, and they would be not saving nearly as much as they possibly could. You can see that their RI coverage was steadily increasing, going from 47 to 66% over 3 or 4 months. Now, this is typical if you have a lot of growth in AWS because it's hard to keep up necessarily with tons of new stuff launching and buying the RIs. But if you stay on the reports, you stay diligent about buying them monthly, you can increase your RI coverage. They particularly had a lot of right sizing that they were doing, so there was a lot of stuff that they were ignoring buying RIs for until it got right sized. But this is, you can see by December they almost hit 70%, and I think they're over that now, given their continued RI purchasing. Now, what does that mean actually for costs? We talk about savings, we talk about, it's going to save you 60%. What did that actually do to their spend? So you can see this is the exact same chart. The blue line is showing the instance hours, which were the bars before. The purple line is showing the RI coverage. The blue bar, the blue columns, I should say, is showing the cost per instance hour. Now, this is an arbitrary metric because some instances cost more per hour, but it was simply a metric to show what the actual savings was. So this will also reflect any right sizing that's been done, but it shows you kind of the power of RIs. Their very first purchase in August, they immediately cut 11% off their EC2 spend per hour or per instance hour. You can see in October, they actually did not make that big of a purchase in RIs. It kind of lagged their growth, and their costs actually went up a little bit. So this is showing and underscoring how important it is to keep buying monthly, because one slow month or 1 month they fell behind or lagged, their costs actually went up even though they were still buying RIs. They caught back up the following month. You can see minus 16% in November and minus 6% in December. So this is very real savings over the course of it. I think they went down by about 30% over the course of their RI buying time. And this is a very, very significant amount when you look at the number of hours and number of instances that are running. If you want to jump straight to 70% savings on day one, you can recognize that savings within the first 30 days and show it on your first bill. So this, again, to wrap up, it shows the power of RIs, shows real-world results, and how it can apply to your company, and what you need to do to manage it going forward. Any questions?
Is the reservation instance only for Linux or applicable for Windows instance as well?
Oh, yeah, reserved instances are applicable for Windows, Linux, Red Hat, SUSE. The reason I brought Linux up is that the RI sharing that was brand new and released yesterday, that only applies to Amazon Linux. It does not apply to Red Hat or SUSE. It only applies to Amazon Linux instances.
And then we have John from Florida asking, I have all on-demand instance. Is it possible to change it to reserved instance?
Yes. So one thing that's very important to remember here is that the RIs do not have to be assigned to an instance. You don't have to launch an instance as an RI. It simply applies in the back end on the billing side. So you don't actually have to do anything with your code or how you're deploying. It just automatically gets applied in your bill. So you can buy the RI, not change anything else, and you will see the savings, assuming that the RIs are of the same instance type, family, and OS as stuff you're running on demand. So they make it very, very simple to start capturing the savings.
Then we have another question asking, is there any way we can see our IR coverage on AWS?
They have some reports. It is not necessarily the easiest to use, especially if you're trying to filter them out by tag or by cost center. They do have several reports available. I don't believe they actually show your RI coverage percentage, but they will show you, hey, out of the hours you used each month, this was RIs, this wasn't. I will say if you have it at scale or even at small scale, because we deal with enterprise all the way down to very small companies, you really want simple reporting and you want to be able to do this easily. What you don't want to have happen is every time you go to buy RIs, it's an annoying manual process that you dread because the savings are so significant. You are going to want to do that. You want to have these reports ready at your fingertips so you can make a quick decision and then buy the RIs from there.
All right. Question. What I understand, I can convert my actual instance reserved on demand into IR. Is it true?
So you don't have to convert an instance. It's the easiest way to think about it is as a billing construct. You're just doing a prepay, and they're going to change your billing for your instances based on that. It's not necessarily something technical you have to worry about, or you have to like check a box saying I want to launch this as a reserved instance. AWS will do that automatically for you in the back end on the billing report that comes out. We will take that billing report and we can let you slice and dice it. AWS does a pretty basic job of how they share it or assign the RI usage. So usually there's a desire to change how that is or have a little bit more granular control on that.
Question, when you have multiple accounts, how do I have to purchase the RIs?
So if you have multiple accounts that are completely independent, you do have to buy them in each account. This is why I mentioned consolidated accounts is definitely the way to go. So they will be shared across all of the accounts in your family, or in the consolidated account family. This means you can buy them in specific accounts if you want to get the reservation, the capacity reservation. So if you buy it within an availability zone, you have to buy it within the account you want the capacity reserved. If you're just getting regional, which I will underscore, a lot of people are going that way, it makes it much simpler. You can buy them in any account you want, and they will automatically get shared across all the accounts that are there. So typically, people will buy them in their master account or in one of the designated accounts. They won't necessarily buy them across all of them, just to keep things simple and just have one account that they have to go into to purchase them.
Any suggestion you'd like to give, Patrick, out there to companies, individuals?
So the one thing I would say is start looking at it now. It is a process that a lot of companies are timid to get started on, but it saves you a very, very significant amount of money. And in this time when most people's budgets are getting cut, but their usage is growing, it's doing anything you can to keep that budget under control and keep the spend under control is usually very, very helpful for any size company. It can make your life a little bit easier too, so that you don't have as much budget pressure and you're not worried about every little dime, because you can save. Just because you can save so much money by doing RIs right and right-sizing your instances.
All right. That's all the questions that we got for this session. I'd like to thank you, Patrick, for being with us today. It's been really good. I love when you mentioned keep it simple in the first half of the presentation. And some details that I'd like to give you guys. If you missed one of our webinars in the past, you can retrieve all of them in our library at cloudacademy.com/webinars. If there are someone or teams out there who would like to have cloud training, please be in touch with us. We can help you with cloud training not only on AWS but also Azure, Google Cloud, DevOps technology, and much more. And we'll try to answer other questions that you might have in our internal Cloud Academy community, and then you can retrieve everything at cloudacademy.com/community. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you guys for joining, and have a good day.
It's been a pleasure. I hope you guys learned something very useful today. Keep an eye on us in the next few weeks. We're going to have amazing things. Until next time, keep building amazing things in the cloud. Thank you.